In the last episode of this series, Richard Petty absolutely crushed the opposition with the most dominant season in NASCAR history and claimed his third championship in this timeline. So today, we're going to take a look at the 1968 season with a consistent points format. In 1968, there were 6 full-time drivers: defending champion Richard Petty, Elmo Langley, David Pearson, John Sears, Bobby Isaac, and Clyde Lynn. In the opening 8 races of the season, we would only have 2 full-time winners. Richard Petty would win 2 races at Race 2 in Montgomery and then at Race 8 in Hickory. David Pearson would also have 2 wins of his own and going back-to-back at Richmond and Bristol. So after the first 8 races of the season, Richard Petty would be at the top of the table by 75 points over David Pearson, with finishes of 2nd, 1st, 10th, 8th, 2nd, 17th, 6th, and 1st. Over the course of the next 8 races, David Pearson would miss a race and would fall a little behind in the championship race, while Richard Petty had some inconsistencies with 3 straight sub-top 10 finishes, and this would result in Bobby Isaac taking the points lead over the defending champion Richard Petty and the 1966 champion, David Pearson. At Hampton, David Pearson won the race while Isaac finished 2nd, and this moved Pearson into 2nd, and now 20 points behind. Richard Petty finished the race in 6th and was now in 3rd, 28 points behind. At the World 600 in Charlotte, David Pearson finished 4th while Isaac finished 5th, closing the gap to 15 points. And Richard Petty finished a terrible 38th and was now 116 points behind in 3rd. At Asheville, Richard Petty bounced back with a dominant win, while Isaac finished 3rd, and Petty was now 96 points back in 3rd. David Pearson finished a mediocre 21st and was now 80 points behind in 2nd. At Macon, Pearson bounced back with a win, while Isaac finished 2nd, closing the gap to 70 points. Richard Petty finished 3rd and was now 101 points behind. At Maryville, Petty won the race while Isaac finished 14th, and this would move Petty into 2nd, 42 points behind. Meanwhile, Pearson finished 15th, slightly extending the gap to 73 points. At Birmingham, Petty won his 2nd straight race while Bobby Isaac finished 2nd, closing the gap to 27 points, while David Pearson was disqualified and was relegated to an 18th place finish. It was now 134 points back in 3rd. At Rockingham, none of the contenders had good days. Isaac was the highest finishing driver with a 24th place finish, while Petty finished 26th and was now 37 points back. And Pearson finished 30th and was now 152 points behind. At Greenville, Bobby Isaac had a terrible race, finishing 22nd, and this would hand the lead to Richard Petty, who won the race, and now halfway through the season, we had a 3-way title fight between the 2-time champion of Richard Petty and David Pearson and Bobby Isaac. At Daytona, David Pearson would finish 3rd while Richard Petty finished 21st, and Pearson closed the gap to 50 points in 3rd, and Bobby Isaac finished 8th and was now just 9 points behind Petty. At Islip, Pearson finished 2nd while Petty finished 4th, and Pearson was now 45 points back in 3rd, and Isaac finished 6th and was now 29 points behind in 2nd. At Oxford, Petty won the race while Pearson finished 2nd and was now 55 points behind in 2nd. Bobby Isaac would finish 5th and would slip back to 3rd, 59 points back. At Fonda, Petty won again while Pearson finished 5th and was now 80 points back, while Isaac finished 4th and was now 84 points behind in 3rd. At Trenton, Pearson finished 2nd while Petty had finished an abysmal 22nd, and Pearson closed the gap all the way to 7 points, while Isaac only managed a 16th place finish and was now 66 points behind. At Bristol, David Pearson dominated and won, while Petty finished 24th, and this handed the point lead to Pearson, and Petty was now 87 points behind in 3rd, while Bobby Isaac finished 4th and was now 2nd, 84 points back. At Maryville, Petty bounced back with a win while Pearson finished 4th, and Petty would move into 2nd, 62 points behind, while Isaac finished 22nd. It was now 147 points back. At Nashville, both Petty and Pearson scored the same amount of points while Isaac finished 4th, and now with 17 races to go in the season, the battle would come down to 3 drivers. Would it be Pearson claiming his 2nd championship in 3 years? Would it be Richard Petty claiming his 4th championship and going back-to-back? Or would it be Bobby Isaac claiming his maiden title? At Atlanta, Isaac finished second while Pearson finished fourth, closing the gap to 157 points, while Petty finished fifth and was now 67 points behind in second. At Columbia, David Pearson won the race while Petty finished 21st. It was now 152 points behind in second. And Bobby Isaac finished 11th. It was now 207 points back in third. At Winston-Salem, Pearson and Petty scored the exact same amount of points, leaving the gap at 152 points, while Isaac finished third, and he was now 222 points back. At Weaverville, Pearson won the race while Isaac finished second. It was now 232 points behind in second. While Richard Petty had a horrible race, finishing 26th, it was now 251 points back in third. At South Boston, Petty would bounce back with a win, while Pearson finished second, and Petty would shrink the gap to 236 points. And Isaac would hold second with a fourth place finish, but was still 232 points behind. At Hampton, Pearson would take a commanding win, while Petty finished second. It was now back to 251 points in second. At Bobby, Isaac finished third, and was now 252 points behind in third. At the Southern 500 in Darlington, Pearson finished a solid second, while Petty finished 20th. It was now 318 points behind. While Isaac finished 33rd, it was now 355 points behind. At Hickory, Pearson won the race while Petty finished 4th and Isaac finished 2nd. And now with 9 races to go, David Pearson had a death grip on the championship. And now all he had to do was cruise to his 2nd title. At Richmond, Richard Petty would win while Pearson finished 2nd, slightly closing the gap to 323 points. And Bobby Isaac finished 6th, growing his gap to 380 points. It was now phased out of contention. At Beltsville, Petty finished 3rd while Pearson was disqualified for a 2nd time this season, resulting in a 23rd place finish. It was now 252 points ahead of Petty. At Hillsboro, Petty won the race while Pearson finished 12th, taking another chunk out of Pearson's lead, and the gap was now down to 199 points. At Martinsville, Petty won again while Pearson finished 6th, and the gap was now 169 points. At North Wilkesboro, Petty won his 3rd consecutive race while Pearson finished 2nd and shrunk the gap to 159 points. At Augusta, Pearson would fire back with a win while Petty finished 3rd, growing the gap to 174 points. At Charlotte, David Pearson finished 2nd while Richard Petty finished an abysmal 32nd, and this would be the final nail in the coffin for Petty, because now Pearson had locked up the title 2 races early, and David Pearson would become a 2-time champion. So in 1968, David Pearson would claim his 2nd championship over Richard Petty, despite a huge late season charge from Petty. But you guys know that saying of, it's not the good days that make you a champion, it's the bad days. Well, that couldn't be more true for this season. Let's look at the stats. Both drivers have very similar stats, but the big one was DNFs. Pearson only had 10 DNFs and 2 disqualifications and missed a race. Meanwhile, Petty participated in every race, had 0 disqualifications, but he had 5 more DNFs this season, and that is ultimately why he lost the championship. Y'all have a good day, and I'll see you next week for 1969.